So, a warm welcome to our Asia PAC H1 2021 webinar. I've seen many familiar faces already also as attendees today, so very warm welcome back. And for those who have not listened to us before, very warm welcome to listen for the first time to our Asia PAC reports. Galen Growth overall does these reports now for more than 5 years. We keep on reporting about ecosystems across the globe, starting off in Singapore, humbly almost 6 years ago now, and expanding to Europe in 2019. We're now covering the entire globe with our insights and research on the digital health ecosystem. The report today, or the webinar today, is entirely focused on the Asia Pacific digital health ecosystem. In the forthcoming weeks, you will also have the chance to listen to the other 3 reports about the other regions, and namely North America, Europe, and the Middle East, where we will also share our insights that we are also sharing within the reports. As shared via the chat window, all of the reports are downloadable via our website. If you have not found the reports yet, you can head over to the Galen Growth page, click on the research section, you will find these reports. These are always complimentary to always give you the best update about the digital health ecosystem. So just as a brief intro about myself, my name is Dario Heyman and I'm the Chief Research Officer for Galen Growth. And I'll basically oversee the entire building of the analytics platform HealthTech Alpha, from where we are drawing out the insights that are coming into these reports. At the moment, we are covering more than 100 million data points about this very fast changing environment, and we are now in more than 40 countries that are available on the platform. And stay tuned with us, because in the next few months, we have some larger announcements to make about the platform overall. So always check your inbox once we are sharing a few more insights about what's going to happen. About Galen Growth, we are a digital health focused data venture analytics firm, and we are basically working with pharma, insurance companies, medical device firms, tech firms overall, and the entire digital health ecosystem from a startup point of view to actually help our clients to find the right fit venture to return their ROI more effectively and faster. We are doing this through 4 particular verticals. We have a program that we call the Digital Health 360 program, which is basically for our corporate clients, the world's best access and up to date to the comprehensive digital health intelligence that we are providing. It's a very bespoke program. We are working with them around the innovation playbook to give them a very strategic view on health tech or digital health, including market level reviews and competitive benchmarking with their own competitors, and help them to develop partnerships with the digital health ecosystem overall. Next, we have the Innovation Explorer program, for which we are working very close with the organization for an entire year to actually help them with their entire business intelligence for the research bit, and to help them really focus on the things that matter and taking the heavy lifting off their shoulders. And then our largest program that we launched this year is our acceleration program for corporates, where we really work throughout the entire digital health journey with the team to actually accelerate the entire pathway throughout the entire globe. So today, as I was sharing in the beginning, we will be focusing on the Asia Pacific ecosystem only. It's been a very interesting year. We've seen 2021 starting very slowly, and then the pace started increasing overall. Asia PAC continues to be the 2nd largest digital health ecosystem in the world, following after straight the North America, particularly the United States. And this year we've seen $4 billion invested across 135 deals. If you've seen the updates that we've been sharing recently, the number has been decreasing year on year. when you're comparing it back to 2019. But if we are comparing it to early last year, when the COVID pandemic really kicked in, we saw the major decrease, especially in China. We now slowly but steadily see that the deal flow is also coming back to this part of the world. So when we're comparing this on a global scale now, as I was saying, Asia Pacific continues to be the second largest ecosystem in the world. When we are seeing the growth that we see year on year, actually, when we compare this more to the 2019, because I want to avoid talking so much about the change as compared to 2020, we're actually exceeding H1 2019, but if you would have asked me two years ago, I would have seen the number in H1 2022 probably be closer to the $5 to $6 billion, a similar increase or a similar percentage increase that we've seen over the years before that. As said, H1 2020 was hugely impacted by the dip that we saw, especially in China. Now with China returning a bit more to business as usual as compared to many other countries across Asia Pacific, we now also see that funding is really coming back there, and we are expecting that H2 2021 continues to see this restoring of the pipeline as we've expected it to happen over the past 18 months in fact. When we look into where the funding is getting distributed, as I was saying, funding in almost all of the sub-regions or all of the countries across the subcontinent are expanding. China has been tremendously higher as compared to the previous years, but now only shares 67% of the total funding that has been invested. When you look 2 years ago, we were roughly at 85%. And in fact, we've seen a major uptick at the Indian subcontinent, where we've seen that in the first half of this year, funding really returned and exceeded tremendously what has been invested there over the past few years. The only countries that saw a dip in investment are Singapore, Japan, and Australia. Australia wasn't too unexpected. It is always a very governmental grant-driven country where digital health ventures are receiving their investments from, and therefore the private investment side is not necessarily the strongest in the part of this world. Singapore has been a bit unexpected, considering it's still the 5th largest market for digital health innovations in Asia Pacific. However, last year was largely driven by a few very large deals that we've seen, and therefore the dip as compared to the past year is primarily driven by the missing of these very large events. Japan has also been very unexpected. However, since we have seen that COVID has really emerged also across Japan again, funding has really slowed down, considering that meeting people in person in Japan wasn't really possible over the past 6 to 12 months, and therefore funding this distribution in a country where the personal touch is very important, we therefore saw also a decrease there as compared to the previous year. And when we look into the sub-regions overall, and we are trying to look into funding and how it's been really accelerating, we've seen that China increased almost 3x year on year. When we compare this to the first half of last year, South Asia increased by 71%, Northeast Asia increased by 70%, and this is largely driven by large investments across Hong Kong and South Korea here. And Southeast Asia has also seen a major increase. However, this is largely driven by investments across Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand, and not so much out of Singapore, which was usually the main driver in Southeast Asia previously. As I was saying, Oceania, which here is primarily Australia and a bit of New Zealand, saw a decrease year on year. However, it has never been a very strong market for private investment overall anyways. When we look into the regulatory side, and when we look into the digital health ecosystem from a Gale and growth point of view, we don't just look into funding overall. What we are really trying to see is where are the newer innovations happening. And interestingly, when we look into regulatory approvals, so with the regulatory bodies across this part of the world, Asia Pacific is the second largest. Interestingly, whenever you hear about digital health innovation and regulatory approvals, you only hear the major headlines coming out of North America. However, if you compare this to what we've seen in both Europe, so with the CE marking in particular, and now with the UK having their own independent regulatory body, we've seen more regulatory approvals happening in both Europe and Asia Pacific as compared to the as compared to North America. Which is quite an interesting, to see as well here. The primary of these regulatory approvals are coming from the medical diagnostic side. So we are talking here about either sort of medical imaging, AI supported tools, or we are talking about genomic tests that can be used really to pre or early detection of diseases, not so much about normal DNA tests that are receiving a regulatory approval out there. Interestingly, we are also having patient solutions receiving regulatory approvals in the first half of this year, with 17% out of all of these regulatory approvals here. Here we are talking about digital therapeutics in particular. So also quite interesting that medical diagnostics and patient solutions are yet the most, still the most regulated digital health categories, how we are tracking them using our own taxonomy. We look into the investment trends across Asia Pacific. As I was saying, funding has really accelerated as compared to last year. Versus last year, we had on average about 750 million, 730 million invested per quarter. This year started extremely strong with 1.65 billion invested in the first quarter of this year and $2.33 billion invested in the second quarter of this year. 2.33 has actually been the largest investor, or the most funding that has ever been invested in the first half, in a quarter in the first half of the year across Asia Pacific. Interestingly, despite the increase in funding, due to the heavy increase in funding that we saw across North America, the total of funding that has been invested in Asia Pacific now only represents 18%, down from 24% last year and 25% the year before. So year on year, Asia Pacific is losing a value share of funding that is being deployed in this part of the world, largely driven also by the emerging of investments across Europe as well. When we look into where funding is floating into primarily, and this is again by the funding stage and total dollars deployed. When we look into China, it's very late stage driven. Same as this in South Asia, so India in particular. When we look into Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, investment is still a bit earlier. Here with Series A ventures in Southeast Asia actually taking about 40% of the entire investment that is being deployed. And when we look into Northeast Asia, it's primarily Series C ventures that are receiving the most value of investment. When we look this on a quarter-on-quarter basis, and I'm trying to see if there's a certain trend line to see. So after Q2, this is when we saw the reemergence and China started opening as a market again. And by this happening, we saw that there was a massive increase in funding that started getting deployed quarter-on-quarter again. If you actually take the baseline here out of the last 4 quarters, we are now at almost $2 billion invested quarter-on-quarter. It actually exceeds this now. And when you look into the previous trend that we saw here, on average per year, we saw here back in 2019 roughly 1.5 million maybe invested, similar for the previous years. So really, with the opening of China as a market again, and the recognition of digital health really being an emerging industry and really can help patients to bridge the gap also to their physicians, and really bring value add to all of the patients and corporates out there that are working in the healthcare space, we finally see this major uptick on a quarter-on-quarter basis. When you also look into the average deal size, back 5 years ago, we were at roughly $6 million. We are now 5x out of what has been invested on average back in 2017. This really shows how the market slowly but steadily moves out from this juvenile space into a more adult space. It's a very emerging market with lots of recognition also in the news out there, and people really understand what digital health is now all about. So as I was saying, since Galen Growth is a veteran in the digital health space for the past 6 years, we've built a very robust digital health taxonomy that is now really being used by many multinational corporations out there also to build their own innovation pipeline out there and how we can support them. At the moment, we are classifying digital health in 17 distinct categories, all of which have a minimum of 2, but primarily 3 to 4 to 5 actual categories under them. There's a certain overlap when you look into more specialized regions as well. But in theory, any digital health category or any digital health venture that exists across the globe can be classified following our taxonomy. When we look into the most funded digital health cluster from the past 6 months, online marketplaces actually saw the most funding invested. That is slightly different to the previous years, where we usually saw that medical diagnostics has been raising the most funding. Medical diagnostics this year is not part of the top 5, and it's actually following slightly below here. Instead, online marketplaces that really bridges this D2C, so direct to consumer, trying to bring healthcare straight to your doorstep, has seen a major investment. However, this is again very largely driven by very large deals. Here, Meowshow actually raised $460 million+ in a Series E venture, so therefore already taking 1/3 out of the entire stake. We've also saw major investments at the Indian subcontinent. Again, here we saw major investments in the NetMeds and 1mg, the recent 1mg acquisition, which is not part of this, obviously, considering that this is an exit round. But these online marketplaces have really advanced and are now creating recognition, and now actually start moving more into the exit stage, getting acquired. We've also seen that NetMeds has acquired MedLife earlier this year as well. So really seeing how certain categories or clusters in the digital health space are advancing. Interestingly, also here, research now actually jumped to the second point. Here we talk primarily about ventures that are supporting clinical trial supports or helping with the drug discovery pipeline of larger pharmaceuticals from an AI-driven decision support tool that can actually help to predict how, for instance, a certain peptide can really tag a protein and therefore, for instance, overexpress or underexpress this so that we can see a certain immune response. So it's more the AI-driven pathway as well. When we look into the distribution of these ventures across these top 5 invested categories, we've been building within Health Tech Alpha a very robust tool to measure the maturity of a certain venture based on 190 distinct data points that we are tracking about all of these ventures. When we look into all of these ventures that we are tracking across these categories, we are seeing a certain trend how mature a particular industry can be and which a venture operates in. When we look into health management solutions, obviously you see here that there are many ventures operating within this space. Here we are talking about anything that is clinical and non-clinical workflow related, as well as EPOS systems for like pharmacies, etc. It's a very crowded space. When you look into the overall this distribution of ventures within, we have an average maturity of about, or we have a median maturity of anything that is between 45 and 50 here. So it's quite an median mature ecosystem. But if you look now into a category that is not as populated, considering that from a technological point of view, it's significantly tougher to actually access the market. The research cluster at the moment shows a very promising range of ventures with an average here, with an average maturity of 57. But when you look into the median, it's probably closer to the 65 to 70 here. So we're entering more of the promising space, not so much yet of the rising star. However, we've seen a major increase in this particular industry field within the digital health space overall. When we look into some of the top ventures across there, many familiar names, LinkDoc in the health management solution space, also Homos here, very much working in the real world evidence space. The wellness space at the moment in Asia Pacific has more than 270 ventures out there. Many of these ventures you've probably heard about. QFit, very large platform across India. Think, probably the largest wellness platform across Japan. Keep here, the Peloton competitor out of China, for instance. Online marketplace is similar. It's the third largest cluster actually within that space. And the research side actually is a very emerging market across the digital health space overall. When we look into the deal flow year on year, we've also seen that certain clusters have received more funding. When you actually look here into the color scheme with a high deal volume, we actually see that medical diagnostics still shares the highest deal volume throughout 2021. Then here followed by patient solutions, which really started emerging quarter on quarter, and now really enters also the dark green here, so with higher deal volume share as compared to 2020, where we saw more of a cooling down in there. The category that lost lots of interest over the past few months or quarters is the population health management side, a field that attracted lots of funding over the past years, now really enters already this dark bluish space here. So not many investments are moving into the population health management side. Research on the other side, what I was also showing before, we didn't just see more value of funding, we also see more volume of funding. And this is actually a trend that started emerging in the second half of 2019, moving here slightly lighter again from the deals that have been deployed in there, and now actually entering this darker green spot here. So also one of the most invested in terms of volume clusters out there. When we look into the therapeutic focus side, also quite an interesting development. Oncology has traditionally been the largest therapeutic focus area in terms of funding invested. In the first half of this year, it has been a very steep drop as compared to the previous years, with only $230 million invested. Instead, we see that there's quite a massive uptick across other therapeutic focus areas. Here, for instance, chronic diseases has been raising more funding. Gynecology has been raising more funding. So the two that are really the losers from the therapeutic focus that have been oncology and diabetes here, down here from 1.23 billion back in 2020, now to only 70 million in H1 2021. But oncology has been, in terms of value, seen the most decrease in funding overall. Also, what we are seeing, I'm not sure if I have it on the slides, but I think I've been sharing it throughout the reports somewhere, is the funding in therapeutic focus area focused ventures that have a particular specialized field that they are focused on has been growing slower as compared to the overall ecosystem development in terms of funding deployed. Therefore, what that basically means is that we see more disease-agnostic ventures, more the ones that are focusing on the workflows, have been raising significantly more funding as compared to the ones that are actually looking into therapeutic focus areas overall. This is a reverse trend from the past years, where we saw that year on year, disease-specific focus ventures have been eating up from the pie and have received more and more funding in terms of value share as the therapeutic focus area agnostic ventures out there. So that's quite a reverse trend that was a bit more unexpected. Let's see what 2021 H2 is going to bring us, whether this trend continues or whether we're going to see a reversed trend happening in the second half of this year. What you will find throughout the report is that you will have also a bit of deep dive slides around the oncology space, cardiology space, and the online marketplace and research side of it. I will only focus on, I think, one or two throughout this report, just to really help you understand how to read these deep dives. When we look into the oncology side, for instance, 7% of the ventures in Asia Pacific are focused on oncology. In total, we are tracking around 1,900, almost 2,000 digital health ventures that are currently private. We are not tracking the ones that are public or have been, or we are tracking them, but they're not part of this analysis here. When you look into where they are located in the oncology space, 46% of these ventures are located in China, which is not a surprise. It's a very advanced market for digital health innovations. Therefore, we are expecting the ones that are having a very strong focus on emerging diseases will also be very advanced across the Chinese market. When we see the development year on year, the number has actually been growing from 102 in 2016 over the past 5 years to 144 in 2020. Now in 2021, we've already seen a few more ventures emerging. However, they will only be included in our year-end reports, where we can show you the more accurate number of how many ventures are operating within the oncology space. THB, and you will notice that in the report, you can actually start clicking on these profiles as well. Is a venture based in India that is doing prescriptive analytics in the oncology side. And when you then later click on this particular link, it opens a bit more information about the venture, that is how we are storing the information within Health Tech IFA's, our analytics platform. When you look into the funding that has been deployed in there, we've seen that across the Series C venture, the Series C side here, we've seen an uptick in terms of investment volume share being deployed year on year. So again, we are seeing that there's an emerging of later stage investment in this part of the digital health value chain as well. Interestingly, there has not been any early stage investment this year yet. So let's hope that we are seeing also more seeds of pre-A deals happening in this part again, in the oncology space. Otherwise, we may at some point run into the risk that there are no more early stage and startups that require investment, and therefore our pipeline is moving towards a too mature side to actually start seeing more and more innovations here as well. So when you look into the funding that has been deployed in there, this year, we've seen that the funding floated primarily into Series A ventures. There has not been any funding in the early side as well, and we have not seen any investment in the very late stage of the pipeline as well. Again, another venture spotlight here, NeoX, a Chinese venture focused on the drug discovery side. It's actually supporting pharmaceutical companies with their oncology pipeline as well. Another deep dive that I have here around the research side, similar layout as well. You can here understand more information about in silico medicine as well on our Health Tech IFA platform. Similar development here. We've seen it has been a very accelerating space over the past years, from 119 ventures now to 170 ventures. So it's really an emerging market, and we're going to continue seeing this moving forward as well. Just 5 more minutes on the Noteworthy side before I open the floor a bit more to Q&As as well. There've been a lot of late-stage deals that are very large, also in deal size across the globe, and therefore also in Asia Pacific. It has not been as tremendous in terms of the number of deals that has been closed above 100 million when you compare this to North America, for instance, where you really saw one event after another happening from week to week. But some of the noteworthy deals here have been happening in China, India, and in Hong Kong as well. Very interesting. In Silicon Medicine closed a Series C round worth 225 million, also from Warburg Pincus. Quite an interesting deal. Traditionally, there's not much investment in terms of value invested across Hong Kong as well, but this half year has been very tremendous, and we are hoping that these significant single deals are actually accelerating particular ecosystems to also start looking into more making the life of digital health ventures in their countries more efficient. Traditionally, we see 100 million plus deals happening primarily in China. So seeing under the top 5 investments across the region, both India and Hong Kong appearing, is quite an interesting development overall. And we've also seen that when we started with our reports a few years ago, we barely hit the 100 million, and now our deal values are actually reaching more than $500 million already. So it's quite an interesting development that we are seeing currently happening, which is primarily also driven by digital health really being recognized as an emerging industry that receives lots of attention from investors and also CVCs as well. And when we look into some noteworthy exits, that was the acquisition that I was sharing earlier in this report already. 1MG has been acquired by Tata Digital to actually now be called Tata 1MG. So the logo is, as of 2 days ago, I believe, this is when the logo was updated. No, it's no longer their logo. They've been fully integrated into the Tata ecosystem now. The deal value of this was undisclosed, how it is often for noteworthy exits out there. GeneMind has been acquired by Sensor Biotech. That one is a strategic acquisition. GeneMind, very strong in the liquid biopsy space. Sensor Biotech, smaller biotech firm out of China. It's been acquiring them for $40 million. It was a very small acquisition. Zomato is quite interesting, is now moving more aggressively into the fitness space with the acquisition of Fitzo. Indo Health has been acquiring PharmaRack to strengthen their pharmacy value propositions that they're offering. And IBH Population Health Solutions here has been acquiring Uprise, if I'm not mistaken, a mental health focused wellness app in March of this year. We look into some noteworthy exits. Actually, in the first half of 2021, there've been more than 22 IPOs and SPACs happening. SPACs, a very US-centric product, but 22 exits happening to the public market overall. When we look into where these exits are happening, it's primarily still from the larger ones across China. Here with Edu Clouds or Edu Technologies, publishing or going public back in January 2021. Basecamp Medical also going public in quite a massive deal of $233 million back in February of this year. Vuno has been going public for about 34 million on the Kosdaq earlier this year. Two a bit smaller IPOs. Welltech it's an Australian venture that listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange for about a 9.5 million deal at their raise, and Aldera has been invested at a 5.4 at the Australian Stock Exchange, and then Life Semantics has been listing also on the Kosdaq, so in March of this year. So really seeing some nice IPOs as well, which always shows a promising pipeline for both the startups and the investors, that there is actually also an exit path for their investments overall. These have been developing fairly all right if you compare this also to some of the public coin offerings, some of the public market offerings that we saw in the United States, where the share price often dropped significantly as compared to the opening date. That's primarily driven by the SPACs not performing too well for the past few months. We've actually seen that the stocks here are performing fairly all right, either down a few percentage points as compared to the opening price, or actually up here with 10% for Welltech, for instance. From the most active investor point of view, we've seen that the most investments are still happening across China. Therefore, it's not surprising that Sequoia Capital and Matrix Partners are amongst them. Even OrbiMed, which invests globally, has been investing 7 deals in Asia Pacific. Mira Asset here, which invests heavily in Korea, for instance, has also been closing 5 deals, all of which happened in Korea this year. And B Capital Group has been joining the Farm Easy deal as well in June of this year. Some noteworthy partnerships. Again, this is really driving innovation out there. The more partnerships we're seeing, the more ventures are also receiving the recognition of what they need to also expand. Again, we are seeing a very huge collation of corporates joining in there. So here, Novartis and Otsuka Pharmaceuticals have been partnering with UB, for instance. SK Chemical, it's a very large conglomerate, has been partnering with Stendigen back in April of this year. Menarini, the Italian pharmaceutical company, has been partnering with Janke around the online distribution of pharmaceuticals and bringing pharmaceuticals more direct to the consumer. Pfizer and UB have both been partnering with Doctor on Call in Malaysia, and Jana Jinmao has been working with More Health. That's a population health management provider, more on the insurance point of view, and the corporate health side has also recently closed a partnership out there. Okay, with this, I hope I gave you a few interesting insights about the report. Again, as I was saying, you can find all of our 4 reports about all 4 regions on our website on galengrowth.com/research. I'm now open to take a few questions, and I already see 2 from some of our participants in there. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to address them now for the next 5 to 10 minutes. So feel free to use the Q&A session in there. So the first question that I see here: mental health was the 5th most funded therapeutic focus area in 2020. How does it look in 2021? Okay, let me actually put this on live, then you guys can also see what I'm talking about. Mental health is a very strong therapeutic focus area as of 2021 when we look into North America. In Southeast Asia or in Asia overall, there has not been the same significant uptick in investment that we saw in other parts of the world. It was a very surprising development, but we are still seeing that these tools are not as much used in this part of the world as they are being used in other regions. Also, when you look into the telemedicine platforms that are existing here, and they are quite ubiquitous. So we see a lot of telemedicine platforms that are actually also connecting you with your physician or with your psychologist. We see more attention towards these platforms out there. So funding in mental health focused ventures in this part of the world has not been as strong as we've seen this in the rest of the globe, which was a bit surprising as well. Next question, why do we think there's such a massive drop in diabetes? Is that the massive 2020 investment? Are they still sustaining the ecosystem in 2021, or is that the companies in diabetes are approaching maturing and becoming self-sustaining from revenues, for example? There are a few reasons why we see a drop in it. Over the past year, we've seen that investors are always looking into solutions that matter at this point in time, not too much forward thinking. We look into the investment that has been executed in diabetes focused ventures in both 2019 and 2020. It has been over proportional. So the ventures that have been raising during this time may not be raising at the moment, considering that their burn rate is not as high as expected, and therefore we may see these investments to last for the next 6 months, maybe 3 to 6 months. So we might see an uptake back in the second half of this year again. Also, we've seen that you see many other verticals entering the diabetes space as well. You see larger pharmaceutical companies going the direct to consumer way, now actually trying to integrate more chronic disease focused solutions directly into their portfolio as well. Forming a strategic partnership is basically also an investment to a startup as well. So closing more diabetes-centric partnerships between pharmaceutical companies and startups could also help them to elongate the way until they have to start raising funding again. And this is also some of the trends that we are seeing out there. Also, over the COVID pandemic, chronic diseases became a burden to many people, but we've not seen the recognition from the investment landscape that they started deploying capital into diabetes-focused solutions to actually start pushing them to the market and helping them accelerate. Instead, in this part of the world, we've saw that investors have been very tight with their money and have not actively deployed so much capital. And this could also be why we saw that there was less investment across certain therapeutic focus areas. Mental health is quite subjected to insurers' intention for payout. Don't I think so? Mental health solutions is very insurance focused. However, we started seeing from the work that we've done over the past 6 months, it's not just to the insurers anymore. We see many other verticals looking into the space as well. Some verticals that you don't necessarily expect that start looking into it. But I hope that we, having a mental health solution should more become a commodity, and therefore just by bridging you and connecting you to a psychiatrist or to a counselor may not move the needle anymore. And most of the mental health solutions that currently exist out there are more a traditional approach than a very maturing and sustaining industry moving forward. It's very easy to replicate. This is what we saw. Many ventures over the past 18 months in the mental health space actually started getting set up and are trying to really bridge this patient to counselor, which is not a sustaining industry moving forward. Are the volume of partnerships up or down as a trend? There are some anecdotal reports that corporates are not as active this year. Is that borne out by the numbers? That is actually true. We've seen it is very, corporates have been taking a very traditional approach this year. Forming partnerships continues to rise this year. This is what we've seen. However, the type of partnerships that we've seen has changed. Previously, it was very often around the strategic partnership. What we currently see, it's a very commercial partnership, meaning that they are trying out, let's say, running a pilot program in a particular part, and are not necessarily renewing these partnerships after. We may see that this is going to start changing again once we're moving into a more later stage, or more into our normal situation again, where corporates really start looking into long-term ROI and not so much into their short-term ROI, how to increase sales over the past 1 to 3 months, but really looking long-term into where will we be in the next 6, 12, 18 months, and how do you build long-lasting partnerships with ventures out there. Even when you look into the partnerships that you see here, it's all most of them are very commercial driven. For instance, the Menarini Janker partnership, that's a very commercial partnership, versus other partnerships that we saw that were happening that are still very strategic out there. Also, what we saw is that over the past 6 months, I believe, we saw that academic partnerships started being on the rise again, which is always nice to see how now startups are actually more actively partnering with the universities again, trying to innovate their solutions and really trying to move the needle forward. Okay, there's one getting answered written. Animal health seems to be very infant. What companies and trends do you see as early stages? It's quite an interesting question. Animal health in Asia Pacific has been always very infant. It's a very pet-centric market. It's not so much around livestock, what we see here. Only when you look into Australia, that's very livestock-centric. The animal health that we see currently emerging is also tailored veterinary, tailored remote monitoring for your pets, really trying to track vital signals. It's a very small market. We don't see much investment floating into that field. We don't see many partnerships in that field either. For Asia Pacific, where owning a pet, not in every country is the status quo, therefore it's quite a difficult market to establish. Also, it's a very self-paying market. So any solution that you're trying to bring out there, you always need to consider that the market you need to enter is a developed market, and therefore people can actually pay for the services that you are launching. Many thanks for your kind words. There was an insightful sharing. Could I please comment on how active are medtech and health tech investments in Q4 of 2021? Which are the top 3 Asia countries which will be expecting more investment activities? Okay, it's always difficult to look into the silver ball. We probably continue seeing China moving forward, and we see more investments. With the recent conversation that I also had within this market, is that really investors are very bullish about investing, however, more into the later stage side of it. I'm personally hoping that both South Korea and Japan are continuously picking up again in pace of the investment that we've seen in there. Also with the recent go publics that we saw in Korea, we can potentially also see that there are more investments also into the earlier stages, as there are now these pipelines building to actually go public as well. Also, the recent regulatory approvals that we've seen always showing that the market is maturing. The more regulated or the more regulatory approvals you have, the more attractive you will be also for your investors overall. So probably my top 3 countries where I continue to start seeing investments, probably even 4, is China, Japan, South Korea, and I believe that India continues to pick up, especially in the online marketplace space, where we've seen many investments happening over the past 2 to 3 months, and we're going to see this moving forward. Can you share your insights on notable regulatory deployments in Asia-Pac countries for digital therapeutics? It's quite a specific one, quite a specific question. The countries where we see regulatory approvals in the digital therapeutic space are particularly China and Japan. Japan, the first regulatory approval was actually given to a DTX venture called Cure App. They're doing smoke cessation and NASH treatments. That was in Japan, the very first regulatory approval that has been given. And now many other ventures are probably start following the trend and trying to get their digital therapeutic listed under the JFDA as well. Good. With this, I think I've answered most of my questions. So with this, I would like to thank all of you. Again, you will find the reports under our research page on galengrowth.com/research. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to info@galengrowth.com, or you can reach me also personally at dario.heyman@galengrowth.com. And I'm looking forward to your questions, insights, feedbacks, so on. Feel always free to also share via LinkedIn our reports. And I'm looking forward to see you in our next webinar session soon. Many thanks.